I wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone else in the effing world. Those were the very words that ended up impacting 4 people's lives, causing the death of 3, and even after Nikki was freed from the wish that the One Wish Willow had on her after Bear mated, her life was doomed forever as she was going to be trapped in a completely different way due to everything that happened whilst she wasn't in control. The ending of Obsession took me to levels of darkness that I hadn't seen in a horror movie in such a long time, and just when I thought it was going to end, there'd be a twist and it'd throw you right back into it and flip things right on its head. This was 1 hour and 45 minutes of steadiness with moments of sharp intensity before then gradually returning back to that steadiness before a rapid increase right at the end, and I feel like it tried to represent what a toxic and obsessive relationship would be like. The final 25 minutes of this movie, which I feel make up the ending, were perfect, and within this video I wanted to discuss exactly why that is. So let's get into it. Here is why Obsession has the perfect ending. This video is going to contain spoilers from the entirety of the movie, so you've been warned. The final scene. From the moment that Sarah was killed, this movie slipped not into 5th, but 6th gear and accelerated towards the ending. What got me most with the ending was that Bear knew full well what he needed to do to stop all of the chaos. He needed to end things for himself, to break the curse and allow Nikki to gain control of her body and mind again and to not be locked in, but he wasn't prepared to do that. Even after somebody who cared so deeply for him, Sarah, was killed because of his own actions and actually helped in disposing of the body. Even then, after being pleaded with by the voice of Nikki inside whilst she was possessed, he wasn't prepared to take responsibility for his actions. He was trying to look for workarounds, and when he got another One Wish Willow and wanted Ian to wish that he never made a wish, but he instead wished for $1 billion, that scream that Bear let out really cut through, and I felt the weight of despair that he had. When he returned back to his home and the lifeless body of Sarah was on a chair with the destroyed face staring directly at him, the possessed version of Nikki screaming at him, begging her to love him, and Ian then walking through the door and being killed by Nikki after just getting his wish of $1 billion. All of the consequences of his actions were facing him, and in that moment, all he could think of doing was sitting there and telling her that he loved her as they were both covered in their 2 friends' blood. This is then when it felt like we were going to build towards a crescendo. Bear ran into the bathroom with the weapon and was going to end things for himself with it, but while staring at himself in the mirror, he wasn't able to go through with it. Accompanying that was the banging on the door that Nikki was constantly doing and her screaming that she wanted to be let in with him because she couldn't be without him. In my mind, the fact that he was trying to go through with it made me feel like he was actually being selfish and he wasn't doing it because he thought it would be better for Nikki. He didn't want to spare her, he was actually doing it because he just couldn't deal with her anymore and he didn't want to face the consequences of there being 2 bodies inside of his home. As we saw, he wasn't able to go through with it, so instead he decided to take the medication and go out the same way as his cat did earlier on in the movie. Just when it seemed like he was fading, he had an epiphany and a moment where he realized that he didn't actually want to die, and he went to stop it, but before he could get the opportunity to, something took a hold of him and we heard the sound that the One Wish Willow opening made, which insinuated that Nikki had made a wish that he'd be deeply in love with her. What she didn't know though was that it basically swallowed the pot, and by breaking the stick, she prevented him from getting them out of his system. So even though he was in love with her, it was only going to be for a small period of time before he died. I felt like there was something sinister about knowing that the real Bear was inside of the shell of a body that was him, screaming in the darkness like Nikki was, knowing that he was literally about to die and was also trapped in there helplessly, being able to do nothing. Then, just as he died, when Nikki then picked up the weapon and put it to her, just as she was about to do it, she quickly snapped out of the hold that the One Wish Willow had and returned to herself. That realization of what was going on around her and the bodies of her 3 friends, the 3 people that she originally cared so much about before now being around her, the abruptness of the comeback and the fact that we were led to believe that Nikki was going to end things because she was without Bear just jolted me around. In those final few minutes, I felt like I was being pulled from pillar to post, and as uncomfortable as it was such a fun but disturbing journey. When the camera then slowly moved over the body of Bear and all we could hear was Nikki crying, it then hit me that she might be free from the hold that the One Wish Willow had and she now had control over her body again. But she was now most likely looking at facing a lifetime in prison for the death of potentially 3 people. Even though she wasn't in control when they were killed, it's her prints on the weapon and also on the bodies. So that was a real gut-punching moment when the realization hit. Bear had essentially ruined Nikki's life in more ways than one. The sobbing in the background over the credits was so different from the crying and screaming that we'd heard Nikki doing earlier on in the movie when she just wanted to be with Bear. There was genuine pain and it cut deep, you could really feel it. The decision to allow it to play over the first part of the credits too just cemented that doomed nature that she had, and it allowed it to just simmer away in my mind. The change in pace and rhythm. An element that I think took the ending of this movie to another level was the change of pace and rhythm. For me, I'd almost describe the first 2/3 of the movie being relatively steady with sharp crescendos that would occur, and then it would get right back to its normal pace and steadiness. Something which represented Bear constantly gaining that control, or at least thinking that he had. However, that final third, the movie took us below the level that we originally perceived to be steady and normal because Bear had managed to sneak out and was sitting in a car with Sarah. This scene in the movie was tonally so different because we got to see Bear actually having a normal conversation where for the first time he wasn't just directly speaking about Nikki. Instead, he was joking with Sarah, speaking with her about the letter that she received about hopefully getting into the last college that she applied for. It felt like there could have actually been a connection there, and we were left there hanging, waiting, wanting to know if she was going to get into the college. Whilst being in this confined space, feeling like we were away from the threats, that was then when the movie arguably reached its highest peak in such a quick and dramatic fashion with Sarah's death. The way that it just came out of the blue and the continual nature of the pounding of the face into the steering wheel and then us actually seeing the results of it. It was just absolutely brutal, and then from that moment the movie never slowed down. The baseline of steadiness was just significantly higher than every other point that we'd been at, and the sharp increase in pace and rhythm added to the tension, the feeling of nervousness and just knowing that something horrific was on the horizon but not quite knowing what. Having most of the darkest visual horror taking place in the last 25 minutes or so was a smart move because even though there were some gruesome moments, I didn't expect to see the things that we did right at the end. The performances by the cast. The final thing that I want to touch on about the ending is the performances that we were given. I loved how the ending incorporated all of the main cast. It was an intimate movie in the sense that there were 2 leads and 2 supporting characters, and they all had involvement in some way during the ending, which I thought was just perfect. They were each important to the wider story in their own way, and also they were to the ending too. For me, the performance of Bear and Nikki was simply phenomenal, especially during the ending. When looking back at Nikki during the beginning of the movie prior to the One Wish Willow Stick being broken, she might as well have been a completely different character, which I think is the highest compliment I can possibly give. The scenes of her covered in blood and simply screaming at Bear because she was so desperate for him to love her back to the same level, the blank look in her eye and the video footage of Bear sleeping on the television in the background was just so frightening. Even when he emerged from the bathroom and she thought that he was going to be besotted with her, the change of emotion from panic and upset to a smile and then back to panic when he died was just perfect. There was a camera technique that was used quite a lot throughout this movie, and it was also used during the ending. It was where the subject would almost be center frame and the camera would just slowly move into their face, and it was like we were getting an insight into their mind. It added tension and just had me on the edge of my seat wondering what would happen next every time it would happen. I felt like I was just being drawn in. Then when we look at Bear, the confused nature that he had, the fear that was in his eyes as he was looking himself in the mirror, and the almost understanding that his time on Earth was finite and was about to be up was something that you could really feel. The resistance that he had, but also the quick change in wanting to get rid of the tablet summed up everything that I thought about the character. Bear was an extremely unlikable character who took no responsibility for his actions and took advantage of a situation to benefit only himself at the cost of everybody else. The performance of the character was top tier, and for him, I'd say a lot of the character's strength came from the facial acting because the range of emotions was vast. The ending to Obsession is one of the greatest endings to a horror movie that I've seen in a very long time. Not only did it feel conclusive, but there were points where I felt like I genuinely couldn't look. There were points where I was disgusted, but I just simply couldn't take my eyes off the screen because I had to see what was going to happen. I was uncomfortable, but it was incredible, and it's one that I'm going to remember for a very, very long time. So, there you have it, why Obsession has the perfect ending.